She didn't know him. She had no reason to trust him. But something in his eyes, steady, serious, kind, told her this wasn't a joke. Seconds later, the people watching from a distance froze. If stories about unexpected kindness move your heart, take a moment to subscribe, like, and comment below. This is Kindness Diaries, where real human moments remind us that goodness still shows up when we need it most. The afternoon had started like any other. Emily stood near the steps of the old church, smoothing the wrinkles out of her dress and checking her phone for the time. She was early, nervous in the way people get when a big moment is coming. Inside, guests were taking their seats, sunlight pouring through stained glass and painting the wooden pews in soft colors. Emily took a deep breath. She had fought hard to get here. Growing up without much money, losing her mom young, working 2 jobs through college, this day meant more to her than she could put into words. It was a fresh start. A promise that life could be gentle again. That's when she noticed the men. At first, it was just a feeling. That prickle on the back of your neck that tells you something isn't right. She saw them across the street, leaning against a dark car. They weren't dressed for a wedding. Their eyes weren't celebrating. They were watching her. Emily tried to brush it off. Maybe they were waiting for someone else. Maybe she was just anxious. But when she shifted her weight, they shifted too. When she turned slightly, they turned with her. She thought about going inside, but her phone buzzed with a message from her bridesmaid saying there was a small delay. Just a few minutes. Emily looked around, suddenly aware of how alone she was standing there in white. That's when she heard the low rumble of a motorcycle pulling up nearby. The man who stepped off it didn't look like anyone she knew. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with gray in his beard and tattoos running down his arms. His leather vest was worn and patched, the kind you only earn after a lifetime on the road. He glanced at Emily, then past her, then back again. Emily stiffened. This was not helping her nerves. But the man didn't smile or stare. Instead, he walked closer, slow and calm, like someone approaching a skittish animal. He stopped at her side, close enough that anyone watching would assume they were together. Then he leaned down and whispered, "You're in danger. Pretend I'm your father." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She didn't have time to ask questions. She didn't have time to think. She only had time to feel the truth in his voice. There was no fear in it. Just certainty. The man straightened up and placed a protective arm around her shoulders. He turned her gently, positioning himself between Emily and the street. To anyone watching, it looked natural. Familiar. A father walking his daughter into a church. "Keep your eyes on me," he murmured. "You're doing great." Emily's hands were shaking, but she slipped one through his arm. She could smell leather and engine oil and something warm and human underneath. Her pulse slowly began to steady. Across the street, the men noticed. They stood up straighter. One of them said something to the others. Their eyes narrowed as they took in the scene. The biker met their gaze without flinching. He didn't stare them down. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, solid as a wall, his arm firm around Emily like nothing in the world could move him. A few long seconds passed. They looked at each other, at the biker, at the church doors opening as guests began to gather. Whatever they had planned, whatever confidence they'd carried, drained out of them. One by one, they stepped back. The car door opened. The engine started. And just like that, they were gone. Emily didn't realize she was crying until she felt tears hit the front of her dress. "It's okay," the man said softly. "You're safe now." She looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw not a tough stranger, but a gentle soul who had chosen to act when he didn't have to. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice trembling. He shrugged a little. "I've got a daughter about your age. If she were standing alone and scared, I'd hope someone would step up." The church doors opened wider, and Emily's name was called. Her moment had arrived. She squeezed the man's arm. "I don't even know your name." "Call me Jack," he said with a small smile. Emily reached up and hugged him, careful of her dress but tight with gratitude. It was the kind of hug you give when words aren't enough. When thank you feels too small. Jack patted her back awkwardly, then stepped away. "Go on," he said. "Don't keep them waiting." As Emily walked down the aisle a few minutes later, her heart was still pounding, but not from fear. From awe. From the realization that kindness had just saved her, quietly and without applause. She found Jack's face once more before the ceremony began. He stood near the back, hands folded, watching like a proud parent. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod, then slipped out before anyone could stop him. The rest of the day passed in a blur of vows and laughter and happy tears. But even as Emily danced and celebrated, part of her kept returning to that moment on the steps. To the whisper. To the arm around her shoulders. To the courage of a man who chose compassion over indifference. Weeks later, Emily wrote about the experience online, hoping somehow it would reach him. She didn't know if it ever did. But she knew this, because of Jack, she saw the world differently now. She noticed the small acts more. The way people held doors. The way strangers checked in on each other. The way kindness often wears unexpected faces. And she made a promise to herself, to be that person when the moment came. To step in. To protect. To care. Because sometimes, kindness doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, "You're not alone." And in that whisper, lives change. If this story moved you, carry it with you today. Look for the moments where you can be someone's safety, even for a few seconds. You never know how far a simple act of kindness can travel, or whose life it might change forever.